I'm going to step off the limb. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
It's a great pleasure right now to welcome to our Book Talk segment. Man who's put together a great book. And again, as we make our way through 2019, we're remembering a lot of things that happened in 1969. Of course, the biggest thing was Apollo 11 landing on the moon for the first time. And the name of this book is called First on the Moon, the Apollo 11 50th Anniversary Experience. And we're joined today by Rod Pyle, and he's a senior editor for Astra, publication of the National Space Society. He's been involved with NASA for many years, writing about it. And Rod Pyle joined us by telephone. And Rod, great to talk with you. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Looking forward to talking to you since we got the book and reading through it. I was a kid of 8 years old back then, watching it on TV on an old black and white, but I guess it didn't matter then because it was black and white from the moon. But what a night that was back in July of 1969, and just that whole experience of watching the Apollo missions when I was a kid. Your book brings back great memories.
Well, thank you. It was a thrill to do the book. I wanted to do something a little different. I'd written a couple other Apollo books and articles and TV documentaries, but I wanted to kind of step out of that typical chronological march that we tend to do in writing picture books and really dive deeper into some of the individual stories. How is the lunar module designed? How do you make the first actual spaceship that has to work perfectly every time? How do you design those huge rocket engines for the Saturn V? And who were these three guys that went to the moon? What do they have to say about themselves? What do their kids and families have to say about them? And that made this book almost a guilty pleasure to write. And Sterling, the publisher, really did a wonderful job, I think, on the execution.
Yeah, great pictures in it. You mentioned building the lunar module. I grew up on Long Island. Of course, Grumman was one of the big companies that contributed so much to, I believe, the LEM primarily. And we always heard about that growing up on Long Island, that it was built, a lot of it out there. So kind of a piece of it, from my hometown. But, boy, I guess over 400,000 people, according to your book, took part in the Apollo series, right? The whole Apollo program.
Yeah, in total, about 400,000 people. Grumman did tackle the LEM single-handedly. I think they were sort of probably wished they hadn't at a certain point after they had the contract for a while. It was a huge challenge trying to figure out a way to make this machine light enough, yet strong enough to accomplish its goals. And by the time they were done, they didn't really get it worked out until late 1968. They were out of time. And they had been shaving down parts, microns at a time, just to try and get everything. They had to count the number of solder balls inside the instrumentation, connecting the wires to instruments, because even one little wad of solder was too much weight. And by the time they were done, they had paid out hundreds of thousands of dollars in bounties to employees because they'd pay you thousands of dollars if you came up with a way to shave off 1 gram. It didn't matter if you're an engineer, a machinist, a cook. You got the bounty if you came up with something that lightened it up. So it was just this titanic struggle. And the same with the other contractors in NASA. Every component was exquisitely designed to be just enough to do the job. And it's astonishing to me, 50 years later, looking back, that this worked as well as it did, that we actually had those 6 landings on the moon and the other missions in the lunar orbit and never lost a person in the Apollo program, except on the ground for Apollo 1.
I was going to say, I know one of the astronauts, maybe multiple, said it at one time or another, we're relying on equipment built by the lowest bidder. but it worked somehow.
Yeah, that's the joke. It did, and even if you were the lowest bidder, you knew you had to come up to snuff, and there was some challenges. North American Rockwell, with those early command modules, had some assembly and design problems. Some of it you can blame on them, some of it you have to share the blame with NASA because they were changing specs so fast. We had this fixed deadline of the end of the decade, which they looked at as the end of 1969, and it had to happen in that period of time. Now, what if they had slipped past it? Yeah, they still would have done it, but this was what Kennedy put before us. And when he was assassinated, sadly, in 1963, it really cemented into the popular mindset 2 things. 1, the end of the decade deadline, and 2, this martyred president's space program, which a lot of people wanted to cancel as we moved to the 1960s, but we had Lyndon Johnson supporting it, and we had nobody's going to touch Kennedy's dream. That's a political hot potato. So I think those factors combined are really a large part of what pushed the program forward.
And again, you look at the technology that basically had to be invented as they went along, and the computers on these lunar modules and command modules. Basically, we have 50, 100 times more in our cell phones than they use to go to the moon, which really is amazing when you look at it.
Actually, hundreds of millions times.
Really?
So
okay. I underestimated.
Assuming you have, it's easy to do. Assuming you have a smartphone in your pocket, that has more computing power, that one phone, that one chip, than the entire planet Earth did in 1969.
Yeah.
So that's the statistic. I was told recently, I was at a conference giving a presentation with Alan Stern, who ran the New Horizons mission, and I had erroneously said that your smartphone has more computing power than NASA did at that time. And Alan Stern said, actually, more than the entire planet Earth. And I thought, that's a stunning statistic. And when you look back at Apollo and you realize, so we're 50 years out now from the Apollo 11 landing, that's almost as long as Apollo 11 was from the first flight to the Wright brothers.
Right.
So that's just stunning when you think of it, and it does kind of say, to me anyway, it's time to step up the pace and start pushing a little harder again. So I really hope that this return to the moon program that the Trump administration has been pushing works out, and then we can use that as a springboard to get to Mars, because it's time to take those next steps.
Yeah, I know 3 or 4 missions, I'm not sure, I think went up to Apollo 20 were canceled while the program was still going on, which even at that time, I remember as a kid, I was saying, why are we stopping? But, budgets and politics entered into it. But, boy, imagine if we had not stopped it, where we'd be today, right?
Yeah, and there have been studies done, and I've looked long and hard for them, trying to figure out, ultimately, given how complex and difficult the shuttle was to fly, wouldn't we have saved money if we just kept the Saturn V and Apollo assembly lines running?
Yeah.
And from all accounts, it looks like we probably would have. That was very robust hardware, but it had a single purpose, which was to get us to the moon and back. We did fly Skylab with it. For better or worse, we had the shuttle for 30 years, and we ended up with a magnificent space station. So they did great work in Earth orbit, but the thing the moon has that Earth orbit doesn't have is resources. If you get to the moon, to get to the South Pole, where both we and the Chinese are now aiming to land people, there's water there in the form of ice. And where you've got water, you can make rocket fuel, you can make breathable oxygen, you can make drinkable water, there's metal in the soil, there's glass, there's all kinds of resources. These are all things you don't have to pay to lift off the Earth's surface or the expensive rockets. You just find it out in space and use it to continue going. So that's really kind of the goal of this new program.
Yeah. I know we just have a couple of minutes left, but again, your book goes through some of the things that maybe people weren't aware of, some I wasn't aware of, how a lot of things went wrong or could have gone wrong. I know they had that computer code that flashed about, half a minute before they were supposed to land or whatever it was, and they ignored it, thankfully, and it meant nothing. And other things that went, I think one thing corrected itself on one of the engines, right? I mean, it's amazing how many things even went wrong and they still overcame it.
There are a lot of moments that could have derailed that landing. Certainly the computer errors are one of them, but a very smart woman at MIT named Margaret Hamilton and a bunch of her associates had written these recovery codes, basically, that said to the computer, it was overloaded. The radar was sending too much data. It said to the computer, look, disregard the unimportant stuff, focus on getting this machine down. Now, you'd assume in today's world that you'd have that kind of software recovery, but this is a computer that's 36K, can barely drive a microwave. So to be landing on the moon and have this lock up is a scary moment. But like you said, they were able to look up the code, say, you're fine, disregard it, we'll continue going. And so they landed, but literally with about 30, 40 seconds worth of fuel left, because of some dynamics when they were undocking from the command module. They picked up a little extra speed they didn't want. And they were landing long, so they missed the primary landing zone, and Armstrong had to really struggle to find a flat spot that was safe enough to land on. So it was very touch and go there for a bit.
And he was probably the most low-key American or world hero we've ever had. I mean, he really never talked about it much after he came home. They did the obligatory interviews, but really lived kind of a quiet life, didn't he, after Apollo 11?
He did. He did. They did a big media tour. I think it was 40 countries, 26 countries in 40 days or some just crazy schedule. And none of the three were terribly social. Mike Collins was the easiest going of all three, but Armstrong and Aldrin had a tough time with doing public relations, but they had to do it. After the mission, everybody announced, the three of them, that they were retiring. So Collins went on to run the National Air and Space Museum and is now retired and enjoying the life of a bit of a raconteur. Wonderful man. Buzz Aldrin had some problems. Coming back was difficult for him. He went through a period of depression and some alcohol abuse, which he talked about very freely in his books, one of the first people of that cadre to ever do so. And as you say, Armstrong sort of stepped out of the limelight and became a university teacher in engineering. So you can imagine going to freshman aerospace engineering and seeing the first guy who walked on the moon at the front of the classroom next to a blackboard. How great is that? So all just wonderful guys. And that whole group of just all those people from the space race years, both the astronauts and the people in mission control and those who supported them, are incredible interviews. And I feel incredibly gifted to have been able to spend time talking to them and writing about them.
Yeah. Great memories and a great book. First on the Moon, the Apollo 11 50th Anniversary Experience is the name of the book, and Rod Pyle is the author. And Rod, give out your website, if you will, or where they can get the book.
Sure. You can get the book at Amazon and Barnes & Noble online and all physical bookstores, which we still have some, thank goodness. And my website, if you want more information, is pylebooks.com. That's pylebooks.com.
Great, Rod. I wish we had more time. Hopefully, maybe we'll down the road. But congratulations on the book, and we'll talk to you.
"30 years ago, I formed Remote Area Medical to help people overseas. But then we found generations of families in America, isolated by poverty from the health care they need. Together, we can take dental, vision, and medical help to 1 million adults and their kids, right here at home in the United States of America."